John Akerman was in the U.S. Navy from 1944 to 1946. All right, well, when I was 15 years old, beginning high school, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and set my future for many, many years. I'm from Florida, and that Sunday afternoon I was out driving with my mother and my grandmother, and on the radio they said the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. And we said, "Oh, that's terrible. Where's Pearl Harbor?" Had never heard of it. And so that was an education. We had to learn about that. Since then, I've been there several times. It was inevitable that I would be in the service. I was healthy, young, male, and I knew I would be in the service. And even a high school turned that way, so that the phys ed, we drilled and did double time and did obstacle courses and things, trying to be physically fit. And I did. I graduated in June the 2nd, 1944. June the 6th, 1944 was D-Day in Normandy. And June the 14th, I got on a train for Jacksonville, Florida, and was sworn into the Navy. And that set that career. I served for 2 years and 27 days, actually. After I was sworn in Jacksonville, we got on a train and they took us to Williamsburg, Virginia, Camp Perry. It was an old CB camp, and had been converted to a boot camp. And I finished 13 weeks with that, and I wrote my mother a lot of letters during that time, and even though, boot camp is hard and harsh, but reading my letters, I enjoyed it because I was doing the same thing I was doing before, but with a lot of friends. I was sent to Newport, Rhode Island for classification, and there I was interviewed by a navigator on a new ship that was just being finished, an attack transport. And I had good math grades, so he recruited me to be a navigator's assistant. In the Navy, that's called a quartermaster. And we steered the ship and kept the logs and all that stuff. And they were finishing the ship USS Mendocino, APA 100. We were on attack transport. We carried 1,000 troops and a lot of hardware and supplies, and we carried all those landing craft that everybody sees pictures of. Yeah, we carried those on decks, and that began my Navy career. And we got ready and left New York, went down the Atlantic coast to Chesapeake Bay and had a shakedown cruise. We tested everything. We tested all the guns and steering and everything, and then they put us in the Navy Yard and fixed everything, and then we headed back down the coast through the Panama Canal and up to California. We arrived in Long Beach, California on Christmas Day, 1944. It was an eventful thing. That day I got to go to Stage Door Canteen in Hollywood and see some movie stars. We were a flagship. We had quarters for Admiral or Commodore, and we got notice that a flagship had been torpedoed in the Philippines, and we had to hurry and replace it. So we made a trip straight to the Philippine Islands during the recovery, the Philippine liberation, and so we were there at Leyte, where the landing was. We were there after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, so that we weren't part of that one, but we stayed there and then started immediately training for the invasion of Japanese mainland. And that was expected to be a horrendous thing. And during that training, we acquired a squadron of transports and and we invaded Okinawa on April the 1st, which was Easter Sunday, 1944. And that was our main war experience, because we were the flagship. We also had the beach party and managed the beach, and we were in close, and it was eventful. Yes, nobody knew what would happen, but in that one the Japanese did not strongly oppose the landing, so it was not bad. But we had a big sick bay, so we started acquiring wounded soldiers, seriously wounded soldiers, and we on the 6th of April, which was the day the kamikaze battle started in earnest. We just barely were missed by a kamikaze. It went right over us and hit the ship next to us. But that was a lone one. We left Okinawa on the 6th of April and went to Saipan to offload our wounded onto a hospital ship. And that was our main war experience. We went back to Hawaii and began training in earnest for the invasion of Japan. And no telling what would have happened, because we were a flagship. We would have been in front. And the kamikazes were prepared for that invasion. And they were deadly on ships. The Navy lost at Okinawa. They lost more ships and men than any other time in the history of the Navy. It was really brutal. And it would have been worse for the invasion, because every person in Japan was prepared to fight. Well, we saw everything. At that time, my general quarter station was on the flying bridge, the signal bridge, which was on top of the ship. And I was a gun talker. I had sound-powered phones on to the 40-millimeter guns on our rear, and I told them when to fire and when not to fire. But I had a vision of everything. I could see everything, and the way the Navy created a separate division of the Navy called amphibious, as we were involved with the landings. And the way it works is that we quickly put our boats in the water, and then they came alongside and they loaded with men, or we loaded them with equipment. And then they went out and started a big circle, and they created a circle. And then when the time came for the landing, they all turned and headed for the beach. That was a particular technique. So we couldn't be very far out, because those little boats had to go in and come out again and be loaded. So it was back and forth. So we were pretty close. When we were at sea, of course, submarines are our enemy, our danger. We had to be at general quarters 1 half hour before sunrise and 1/2 hour after sunset, because we're most vulnerable then, because a submarine can silhouette a ship against the bright sky and spot you completely. And so that was the most dangerous times for us. And when we were cruising at sea alone, and we usually were alone, no escorts, we had to zigzag. We could never steer a straight course. And it was, since my work was on the bridge, I was always involved with those course changes and steering and all that, yeah. The night before the invasion of Okinawa, we were in a huge convoy. It was I think maybe the largest military convoy in history. We gathered in one of the Pacific islands in the center. I've never seen so many ships, and every kind was there, battleships, and we left there in convoy and arrived at Okinawa on Easter Sunday. Yeah. And the night before, not having any idea what was going to happen, just knew that we were invading an island. I was nervous, yeah. people have asked me, was I ever scared? And I said, not really. When you're well trained, you do what you're trained to do. And you don't have time to be scared because you have to do it. We picked up a combat team in the Philippines and took them to Japan for the occupation. So we were there for that occupation in Yokohama, and it was interesting. Tokyo and that area was totally destroyed by fire. It was horrendous. Just empty lots with steps and ceramics and safes, maybe anything that wouldn't burn was still there. And they lost more people in Tokyo to the firebombing than they did in the atomic bombs. Yeah, so they had to quit, I guess, and that was. I'd never heard of an atomic bomb, but we were glad they did it. We took part in what was called a magic carpet run. We were a transport. We could carry up to 1,000 men, and at the end of the war, because the peace was signed on my birthday, September the 2nd, and we arrived right after that into Tokyo Bay. By then, I was steering the ship in and out of harbors, and so I got to steer the ship through Tokyo Bay. And it was a time in which the war was over, and so the government assigned a number to everyone depending on how many combat hours they had and how many days they'd been in service. And when you had a high enough number, they sent you home. And we were doing that. We made several runs from Tokyo to San Francisco with high-numbered people. That was a delightful time. I came home with a whole lot of other young men, newly discharged, and we all pretty much had the same goal, to go to college. It was a funny thing, but the day I was discharged, there was a bus strike in Florida, and so we had no way to get home. And some guy working for the Navy said, yeah, several of you said, give me $25 and I'll drive you all home. And so I had a ride home, and I got home. Nobody was expecting me, and it was a surprise, but they knew I was coming. I mean, they knew I was getting out, so that was not a surprise, no. It was just kind of an empty feeling. What do I do now? Because I had no career of any kind, and you don't have a career of being a Navy quartermaster. One thing that I really appreciate now is a BLT, bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, because when you're at sea, we had good food. We had frozen eggs, and we had everything that normally you'd have, but no fresh vegetables. And so a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich is a gift from God. And we look forward to it so much. That was the first thing we would get when we got ashore, yeah. I know exactly. Dealing with officers every day, I came to feel that the Navy was very, very strongly segregated between enlisted and officers. And I came to realize the only difference between those guys and me was a college degree. And so it changed me to determined to get a degree. And the GI Bill gave me the opportunity. And so I became a mechanical engineer, yeah. And that set my career very nicely for that, yes. I think it made a man of me, yes, because I was an only child raised by a single mother, divorced mother. And I was kind of spoiled and had no idea what to do with my life. All I knew is that I knew how to take outboard motors apart on the boat. And I had done that a lot, so I was mechanically inclined. At the end of the war, the day that Japan announced they were quitting, I was on leave in San Francisco in a movie theater, watching a movie, and some guy came running in and said something, and several people went running out, and we got curious and finally got up and went out to check, and there was pandemonium in the streets. Actually, it was a riot. People were breaking windows for liquor stores and stealing stuff, and it was awful. And they declared martial law. And we were in San Francisco getting our ship cleaned up for the invasion of Japan. And so we went on with that, yeah. When a newspaper said atomic bombs, and so he said, "What's an atomic bomb?" That's all we knew about it, that's all. Also, at the time, though, we were watching ships come in that had been hit by kamikazes in Okinawa, and they were just disasters. They were coming in to be rebuilt. They could float and drive, but you know, the superstructure was all destroyed. It was horrendous. When I was speaking to schools, one time somebody asked me something I remembered that was funny, and I couldn't think of a thing. Since then, I have written about one event that was sort of comical. I mean, it could have been a disaster, but it wasn't. But I was the quartermaster of the watch, and the helmsman at the wheel was steering the ship, but it was not difficult, so he had idle time. And the ship's wheel is a big wooden wheel with spokes, and in the middle of it is a hub, and in that was a knurled knob. And he started fiddling with that knob. That knob is the lock for a key that ties the wheel to the hub. And he got it loose, and it fell out and fell into a hole in a grate the grate on which he was standing, a wooden grate that the helmsman stands on. And so we were out of control, and I hollered, and we sounded collision quarters, which is loud sirens and all this going on, because we were in convoy, and being a flagship, we were in the lead of it, and there was ships on either side of us, and we couldn't steer, and utter panic. And so I lifted that wooden thing and got the thing and put it back in, and we were back on again. But it was fire drill of the worst kind, yeah. And that's kind of funny. I mean, after it's funny, yeah. I learned the value of an education, and with the GI Bill, I came out and graduated from Georgia Tech. Became an engineer and worked for McDonnell Aircraft in St. Louis, and got a job here with Lockheed, and for 6 years I test flew C-130 planes. The first production airplane flew after I got here, so I'm very familiar with that. Well, I appreciated its accuracy. One thing that's impressed me is that looking toward the Lincoln Memorial, there's a wall, and it has a bunch of big gold stars on it. Each one of those stars represents 100 men who died in World War II, and that wall is full of stars. That's very impressive. And then a lot of the verticals are bas relief. They're three-dimensional, and I really appreciated that. The sculpture was great, and I got some memories and such. And I was with a man who was one of Merrill's marauders, and that was an experience. He had walked from India to Burma, and then fought a war. It was incredible what some people had to go through. And I guess I'm glad I missed some of that, but I didn't miss all of it. So, yeah. I have a clear picture in my mind of what many men gave for their country, but in my mind, I think that my service, I think you have to understand how tough things were in the midst of the Depression. I was born before the Great Depression started, and I've lived through the middle of it. And the war gave some relief from that. But, you know, you just got used to not having things at all. You managed to live. We were encouraged to start little private gardens, trying to get some more food. We had to save things, and we had to, all the high school kids had to collect metal, and it all went to the war. We even saved the grease, cooking grease, saved it in cans, because they made munitions out of that. There was a lot of government messages that we got, a lot of manipulation in many ways, and I think we bought into it. But being in the service was doing my due, and I still think that. I mean, I think, you know, that we have to defend what we use and need and love. And I do love this country. I've learned to appreciate it. I've been back to Japan since the war, and was amazed to discover that the Japanese people love Americans. I mean, it's wonderful. You'd think they'd be bitter because they have so much destruction there. But I felt very, very well received, and people were honored to let us spend the night with them. It was great, but a lot of that was MacArthur's maneuvering to build them back after the war, and they did a good job. So the war was not long. The effects of the war didn't extend forever. It was over, and that's good. So in Memorial Day, I remember those who paid the full price, maximum price, and the fact that everybody did a lot, and willingly. I volunteered, and many people. I would have been drafted. I mean, the draft was there, so it was inevitable that I would be in the service, and surviving then was just up to me.